Alright guys, it's 9:15. Actually it's 8:15. It's fake 9:15. This is my least favorite day of the year. The day we all collectively agree to have one less hour of sleep. So, I don't know why.
Agree?
We did do this.
But you can at least predict the news. There will be many articles about why do we do this? We'll do nothing different. Nothing will change, and next year we'll do it again. It's because we can't agree on standard or daylight. We would all quit changing if we could agree on one.
Lucky for me,
I really thought we'd have half people gone because everybody would miss their alarm clocks. And like, we're full today, so.
That's the joy of having your cell phone, because then it automatically.
Yeah, that's true. So you have no excuse anymore, right? Okay. All right, well, welcome everybody. We'll start with reading our summary from last time, which was Genesis 31 and 32. Our title was Jacob and family flee Laban with God's help, only for him to wrestle with God, emerging as a limping Israel as Esau takes up the chase. And our summary was, Jacob flees from Laban in secret. Laban finds out and catches up to him. Rachel stole Laban's household gods. God told Laban not to say anything good or bad to Jacob. Laban searches for the gods, and Rachel lies about the gods, and Laban doesn't find them. Jacob gets a backbone and argues with Laban. They make a covenant to not cross the line, and they part ways. Jacob divides his camp in two in case Esau attacks. Jacob sends gifts to placate Esau. Jacob wrestles with God in fear of his brother Esau, and Jacob gets a new name, Israel, as struggle with God. So, we'll put that one into our bucket number 2. And we'll start on our summary for the next week. So, title this week, James got us started, and that was a tough one to shorten because there was just a lot of seemingly disconnected events. But we came up with Esau's nice, but Jacob moves on. Dana's defiled, Shechem is slaughtered, Bethel gives a blessing, and Rachel rests in peace. So, what's our summary for Genesis 33 to 35? What happens first?
Jacob meets Esau.
Hmm?
Jacob meets Esau.
Jacob meets Esau, that's right. Okay. Then what? It is open book. So.
I would say they reconcile, but we probably.
They reconcile as much as they're ever going to.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll put in quotes, since Jacob leaves him hanging.
Does Jacob just leave?
Yep.
Bought some land and pitched his tents.
Yep, that's right. Jacob bought land in near Shechem.
Built an altar, named down like Israel.
Yep, altar at Bethel. Did you build an altar at Shechem too? You built 2 altars in that story? I don't remember.
Yeah, it says in pot of ground he pitched. He set up an altar and called it Elohim Israel.
Ah, that's right, that's right. So the first one he builds at Shechem. And what?
I'm pretty sure Dinah was defiled sometime after this.
Dinah is raped?
Wait, though.
Raped is Dinah?
Yeah, but defiled is a more nicer way to say it. And I don't really like saying that word. So.
Oh, that's true. It's not a good
So I
word.
always try to look at
But it is what happens.
So I always try to say other words besides that.
The Bible does that too.
Yeah.
It's nice it doesn't actually use the words we would use.
Yeah.
It tries to sugarcoat it a little. But what next?
Dinah's family is outraged.
Yes, they are.
Well, well, at least her brothers anyway.
Yeah, just his brother, her brothers actually.
Yeah, like, yeah, like her father.
Jacob doesn't seem to
It
comment.
seemed like her father who couldn't care less, like, if it was my father, let's just say, the end result wouldn't be pretty.
Right.
They pretty much killed everybody,
Yep.
except a few, but
Simeon, Levi,
it's still a
slaughtered the whole town.
They convinced all the men of Shechem to be circumcised.
Yeah.
Okay. Then,
Jacob returned to Bethel.
yes, turns to Bethel. And is the whole saying is blessed and builds an altar. Closing off that story.
Fear of God's on the whole territory.
That's a good point. That was on the way to Bethel, wasn't it? Very good. Okay? Then the biggest event probably in Jacob's entire life. Rachel dies. Okay.
Isaac dies.
Yep. Jacob makes it back home. His dad Isaac never met Rachel. You know, that's kind of sad. All that 20 years, he never met Rachel.
Rachel gave birth to Benjamin.
Good point.
Probably should put that
Right,
one.
yeah,
You
you
probably should put that one
probably-
in the one before it.
They go together.
Yes, they go together.
And then Isaac dies, and Esau and Jacob bury him. How about that? That's a lot. We did a lot last time.
Uh-huh.
Hope that doesn't set your expectations for this time. We good to you guys? Okay, that's what happens in Genesis 33 to 35. Can't
I
be
guess
changed
you caught my mistake where I put call her Rebecca instead of
Oh,
in the
I didn't want to say anything.
yeah. So Rachel. I was like, wait a second, I didn't put that right.
As long as you guys catch my mistakes. All right. So Genesis 36. You guys want to turn there? We'll dive in for today. So Genesis 36 is the genealogy of Esau. It tells us, I think, like 5 times in that chapter that Esau is Edom. I don't know why it keeps telling us that over and over and over. But in parentheses, it keeps saying Esau's Edom, Esau's Edom. I thought this would be a good point. I went over a little bit of Edom's history before. The Bible spends an entire chapter discussing the descendants of Esau. Like, it's pretty important. They keep coming up in the story over and over again, so I thought it might be a good time to take that kind of telescope view, back up, see history from this point forward again for a couple of the descendants at least, so that as we get through the story, you guys have those reference points. You've heard them before, because unfortunately this is sort of like this happens, then this happens, then this happens, and sometimes that can get muddled mentally if you don't really follow the sequence, but the only way I know to learn it is hear it once, it's kind of muddled, hear it again, a couple things start to be familiar, hear it again, now you're like, oh yeah, I already know that, like what's the big deal? So we're going to go through a little bit of that today, but my goal here is not for you guys to memorize dates and names and places and everything that happens. Just get a feel for the sequence and write it down. So everybody write it down so you have this to refer to then later on. It's really important in Daniel because all of Daniel's prophecies depend on you knowing what happened in the 450 year intertestamental period after the prophets stop and Jesus shows up. And so we'll get to that. I do think one of the points of the Bible here though is Esau.
Can't say green.
Okay.
What happened?
You got a new copy.
I got a new cup.
It needs a lid though.
Oh, it's got a-
Oh, okay. All right. Because it shows you the descendants of all these other nations. You know, I feel like it's.
Shame.
Go ahead.
Would you not be bulletin?
I feel like it is giving you this sense that this is the universal God, right? This is not just Israel's God. This is the God of everybody. And so even though we're not going to read this and read all of those names, as much as I'm sure you guys would like me to read all the names, I did say every list of names you should pick a favorite. My favorite is Oh Holy Bama. I was this close to naming my kids that. And then, I don't know which one, but can you say that in anger? Oh Holy Bama, come on. Anyway, so what we're going to start with is Amalek. So Amalek, it says in here, is one of his grandkids. Okay, Amalek shows up a lot. So I'm just going to kind of write out where these things happen and when, and we'll see what happens of it, what comes of Amalek. So first off, in Exodus 17, Amalek attacks after the Red Sea. This is the big event that predisposes God against them. So Israel has just crossed the Red Sea. They escaped Egypt. They're weak, right? They just got past Pharaoh. And Amalek comes down from where they live and actually starts attacking them, especially they preyed on the weak ones at the back, essentially, when they were trying to get away from Egypt. And so that leads to Deuteronomy 25, where God is mad at the Amalekites. So the Israelites end up defeating them, but God never forgives them. He sets a grudge right here, and he predicts, I'm going to destroy you guys. So then Numbers 14, they show back up again. Numbers 14. And this is when the spies went in to spy out Canaan, okay? And they come back and tell everybody there's giants there, like, we can't possibly win, what are we going to do? And everybody loses faith, falls away, God punishes them, and then they realize their mistake, they should have had faith, and so then there's this rogue group of Israelites that decides, well, we're going to go in and attack anyways. Like, if that's what God wanted us to do, we're going to go. And Moses says, don't do this, guys. This is not what God's telling you to do. You can't fix what you did by now going and attacking. And so they go, and the Amalekites just wipe the rogue Israelites out. And so I'm going to call that Amalek beats the rogue Israelites. Then we hit Judges. You remember the book of Judges is 13 times. We're going to be in chapter 31st. 13 times the Israelites are following God, and then their prosperity leads them to not trust God as much, and then they fall away and worship other gods, and then God punishes them, and then they end up slaves under somebody else. God raises up a judge. They cry out to God. God raises up a judge to save them, and then they're back following God again. This happens 13 times in Judges. So a couple of those involve the Amalekites. So Judges 3 is Amalek and Moab. Remember, that was one of the sons of the daughters of Lot. Get together and they take over Israel. They oppress them for 18 years. And then Ehud, you may remember this story. Ehud has the knife and he stabs it in the fat Moabite king Eglon, and it like disappears inside of him. And then he just walks out and slowly closes the door behind him and leaves. And like an hour later, they find the king dead, and so that's Ehud was the judge that defeated them. So I'm going to write the judge's name that wins. So that's that story. That was the Amalekites, perfectly happy to oppress the Israelites. Then Judges 6 again. They join with Midian. Midian is Saudi Arabia. And they join with Midian, and then Gideon delivers them from the Midianites and Amalek again. So then we get to 1 Samuel 15. Samuel is where we start with the kings, right? The kings, the books of kings come after that, but Samuel is the one that anoints the first king, Saul. And so King Saul gets anointed by Samuel. He's king over Israel, and God says, now's the time. The promise I made back up here in Deuteronomy that we're going to wipe out the Amalekites. Saul, your job is to go kill every last Amalekite, man, woman, and child. That's what he tells him. And unfortunately, Saul spares Agag, the king. Saul does not do what God told him to do, and Samuel comes to Saul and says, why did you keep all the livestock that God told you to kill? Why did you let Agag live? Why did you keep these other people alive? Like, you're going to lose the kingdom, I'm going to tear it from you. And that's the beginning of the downfall of Saul, is when that happens with the Amalekites. So then, like, one chapter later, Saul says, okay, I'll make it right. And he calls Agag in. Agag's really happy, and he cuts him to pieces. And Agag dies. But tradition says that in the day before, when he was supposed to have killed Agag, and the day he actually killed Agag, Agag fathered a child. And that child's going to become important. So remember that. So Saul spares Agag. Then we get to David. So David takes over. I'm not sure if my marker is going to last here. 1 Samuel 27. David raids the Amalekites from Ziklag. This is an important city. If you go watch the new animated David movie, they actually have Ziklag. It's kind of nice because they got some things right from the Bible for a change. Not everything. In the end, David just sings to the Amalekites and they win. And that's the Western version. That's not what happens. Anyway, so David has taken up residence in Ziklag because Saul has been trying to kill him. All of his men that are with him, they take over this abandoned city of Ziklag as mercenaries for the Philistines. Because the only way he escaped from Saul was by pretending to be completely insane. He literally walked up to the gate of the Philistine city and peed on it and was like hollering crazy stuff. And the king's like, who is this guy? And so King Achish hires David, the world's greatest general of all time, to be a mercenary for him, to go and attack the Jews. David spends all his time in Ziklag attacking the Amalekites, taking the stuff, giving it to King Achish, and telling him he took it from his brothers, the Jews. And so the king thinks the Jews hate David because he keeps taking all their stuff and attacking them. Really, that all came from the Amalekites. So then the Amalekites do what you would expect any good Amalekite to do to David. 1 Samuel 30. They burn Ziklag while David and his men are gone. And they take all the men, women, and children and leave with them. And then David and his men get back, find all their families gone, and they chase them, and they end up getting them back and completely defeat the Amalekites at that point in time. So that's in Samuel. 2 Samuel 1, Amalek shows up again. Saul's dead. And the guy who brings the news to David that he was dead is an Amalekite. The Amalekite grabs the crown from Saul and brings it to David and tells David, David, here's the crown. I slew Saul, and here's the crown for you. And he's thinking David's going to reward him for having killed the guy who was trying to kill him, and instead David cuts his head off because he says, who do you think you are to kill the king of the God of Israel? And so the Amalekite report of Saul's death happens here. Are some of these stories ringing a bell? Hopefully. Yeah. All right.
Although I gotta say, Saul sometimes comes across as a tragic figure sometimes.
He was very tragic because he didn't want to be king in the first place. He was literally hiding in the baggage.
Honestly, honestly, being king basically drove him off the slippery slope.
Yep. He was our proof from God that just because somebody looks like a king doesn't mean they are.
Doesn't mean they are.
Because that's why everybody liked him, because he was really tall and looked like a king. All right. So then we get to 1 Chronicles 4. And Hezekiah, this is sort of the end of them. King Hezekiah, completely destroys the Amalekites. That's the end of the Amalekites in history, except for one event that every time I ever read this story, I never noticed it at all. In Esther chapter 3. There's a guy in there named Haman. Remember Haman? Haman was the world's first Hitler. The world's first Hitler because he sent an edict throughout the entire Persian Empire that on a certain day, everybody was supposed to kill all the Jews. There was going to be a Holocaust. It was scheduled for this day because he didn't like Mordecai, the Jew who wouldn't bow to him every time he walked by, because Haman was a big shot. And when it introduces Haman to us, it says, Haman the Agagite.
Like he could be the type he could be like basically like he could be like his picture could be in the dictionary of the word petty.
Not even petty. He was evil. He gets a bad name for all of history. But he does get hung on the gallows that he built for Mordecai, which is one piece of poetic justice. But this word, Agagite, Haman was descended from Agag, the guy that Saul spared. If Saul had done what God told him to do and wiped out all the Amalekites, Haman, the first Hitler, never would have shown up. I love the telescope view sometimes. Isn't that cool? Like, God knew back here, this has to happen, guys. So, that's Amalek. That's just one of Esau's descendants. You guys got that? Erase that. So now let's take a look again at Edom. Hopefully some of these things look a little familiar. I'll add some things. And if this does get a little dry, just remember, this is instead of having to read all those names. So first off, Numbers 20. The Israelites have crossed the Red Sea, and they're trying to get to Canaan. So they've come across over here. I don't have the Edom on. They've crossed over here. They're trying to get back here, and Edom will not allow them through. They blocked them off. They said, you can't bring 2 million people through the middle of our country. We think you're going to attack us. So they won't let them through. So they're very angry at Edom. So I say that is Edom blocks Israel. But a very interesting thing comes up in Deuteronomy 2 and 23. God explicitly tells them, don't detest an Edomite. He says, they are your brothers. You are not to hate the Edomites. The Amalekites attacked them. He said, we're going to wipe you out. But when the Edomites wouldn't let him through, he said, don't detest your brothers. Which I'm pretty sure no man in Israel would have written at that time. That's pretty clearly a message from God. So then we hit to 2 Samuel 8. And David takes over. David is ruling Edom. Because that's what David did. He basically conquered all the tribes around and brought everybody together under one united monarchy. But then, of course, David's son Solomon loses the kingdom. And so in 1 Kings 11, a guy named Hadad, the Edomite, rebels against Solomon. And so the southern and eastern portions of Edom end up leaving the rule of Solomon, and only the western portion is left after Hadad. But it's not long in 2 Kings 8. West Edom rebels. And that happens under Jehoram. And then in 2 Kings 14, so they're an independent country now. King Amaziah takes Petra. Has anybody ever seen Petra? When I say Petra, do you have a picture come up in your head? Like, if you haven't, I thought we need to see this place. It's one of the most amazing places in the world. You will also learn why Edom is called Edom. So this is the place they took, and it's pretty amazing. So here's where Petra is, capital of Edom. What color would you say these rocks are? It's a little washed out here. They're red, right? The red rock country is called Edom. It's called red. Esau gets there, who was also called Edom because of soup, and it seems like this was a marriage made in heaven, right? Like Edom, the man, founds a red rock city in Edom. So Edom was one, or Petra especially, was one of the most defensible cities in the entire world, because you can only get to it through these really deep canyons. And so it was said that only a handful of men could hold Petra against an entire army. So the idea that Amaziah actually took Petra, that was impressive. It's very hard to do. So let me give you an example. We will come down here. Hopefully I hit the right spot. So you can kind of look down. You see how tall these things are? Like if you're an army trying to invade and you're coming through this little pass, like the defending army definitely has the advantage.
That is a beautiful canyon.
It is very beautiful. And then you see this.
Oh.
Like, it's literally cities carved in the side of the rock, these massive structures. It's so cool. Like, I would love to go there. All of the little holes look very ominous to me. I don't know why. They're all dark. Like, I don't know if I want to go in there. So there's one of them. I walked around this in Google Earth.
Now, how big is
for
the
like
inside,
an
though?
hour. I don't know how big the inside is. I couldn't, like, get a
Do
street
they have
view
cities
inside.
inside these mountains now?
Let's see. Here's my moon, because my north got.
Like the Aztecs used to have like their towns inside the sides of the mountains or stuff.
Yeah, so here's an idea of just how narrow some of those spots are. That's only like 3 men wide. And it goes way, way up. So anyways, you walk around here, there's a bunch of those carvings all over, these huge buildings cut into the stone. There's also just tons of little caves. This whole area is tons of little caves. So this is Petra. This is the capital city of Edom. Now, those carvings were not done by the Edomites, though. They were done by the Nabateans, who come later, so we'll get to them in a few minutes. But, oops. There we go. So that was the center of Edom. So Amaziah takes it. Then we get to the book of Obadiah. Where did I put my marker? Here it is. It's one of the shortest books in the Bible, but it is an entire, so we had an entire book dedicated to Esau's genealogy. There's an entire book dedicated to God's prophecy for the destruction of the Edomites. That's what Obadiah is. It's an entire, how did I shorten this? Yeah. It could otherwise be called the Book of Edom's Destruction. So now we start getting close to the intertestamental period, okay? So we've worked our way from Esau over here all the way up until we get to David at 1,000, and then through David conquering them and a couple other kings and so on, then we get on up into where the intertestamental period starts here. So the end of Micah, last prophet, last thing written. Now we've got several years where nobody writes anything until Jesus comes. So in the period of 500 to 400 BC, oh, you know what's important though? The reason Edom is going to be destroyed is because the most important date in this entire picture, other than 0 BC, like when Christ was born, is 586 BC. Remember that number. 586 BC is when the Babylonians carried off all the Israelites to Babylon. They attacked them once in 605, and then in 586 they finished the job. And that was the defining event of this entire story we're going to go through in the Old Testament. And so the Edomites, their brothers, sat by and cheered on the Babylonians as they took all of the Israelites away. And so because of that, the book of Obadiah came about. And God said, because you cheered on the destruction of your brother, you are going to disappear. And so in this period, the beginning of their disappearing starts, and this is where the Nabateans come on to the scene. So Nabateans pushed the Edomites into Hebron. Nabateans are descendants of Ishmael. So there was an Arab tribe that was particularly strong that is gradually pushing Edom out and up into Judah. And so it pushes Edom from down here up into Idumea, what becomes Idumea later. So this is where they all settle around Hebron. Okay? So then so that's the period Micah's writing, right? We get to the end of the period. The Nabateans now fully have that in hand. They've carved the city of Petra up. And then in 300 BC is where you get the naming of Idumea. So I'm going to call it the Hellenization that gives us Idumea. Because remember, the Greeks, Alexander the Great, had taken over basically the entire Persian Empire, but he tried to force the Greek culture on everybody, especially the generals that came after him. So the forcing of the Greek culture was called Hellenization. So then, we get to 200 BC. In Daniel, it talks about like four horns, I think, on a certain creature or something like that. These 4 horns that followed the one great horn, they were the 4 generals under Alexander the Great. And 2 of the generals, Ptolemy and Seleucid, are the ones that matter for our story here. So Ptolemy and his descendants were called, those kings were called the Ptolemies. And the Ptolemies were ruling from Egypt, this area, and up through the coast. And so they actually had Idumea for a while in this time period. And then in 200 BC, they're fighting the Seleucids, S-E-L-E-U. And the Seleucids were the kings under the general Seleucus. And so after he dies and the successive kings come on, they become the Seleucid kings. And they defeat the Ptolemies. So the Seleucids now control all of Israel, essentially, including Idumea at that point, about 200 BC. So we're getting closer to Jesus, right? We're halfway through the intertestamental period at this point. And then some people you probably heard of before because of Hanukkah, 167 BC, the last Seleucid king before the revolt was Antiochus Epiphanes IV. Remember, I've said that one a few times. And he creates an altar to Zeus in the temple and sacrifices pigs on it, specifically to make the Jews mad. And so they finally rebel at that point under a guy named Judas Maccabee. And so these are the Maccabees, called the Maccabean Revolt. Maccabee means hammer. He was called the Hammer. But his actual family name was Hasmoneah. And so the kings that come after Judah Maccabee are called the Hasmoneans. So if you've heard of the Hasmonean dynasty before, that's who they are. They're the guys that came after the Maccabees. So now the Jews are back ruling this area again. They're ruling Idumea. They're ruling Jerusalem. They've got Judah back. Still kind of under Rome's authority, so to speak. But the first guy who becomes king in that is John Hyrcanus I. And so he's the important Maccabee. So he was high priest and king at the same time. Only guy who was ever both of those things. And as high priest and king in 110 BC, we have a reliving of the Shechem mass circumcision event where he forces circumcision on all the Idumeans. So Hyrcanus is spelled with a Y, Hyrcanus. He converts the Edomites to Judaism forcibly, like they have to. And so at that point, Idumea as a people and as a nation disappear, except when we get to 37 BC. So before that happens, 63 BC. So John Hyrcanus, bad guy, he ends up getting stripped of his title and made only the high priest, and he's not king anymore because, well actually no, I'm getting ahead of myself. This is the beginning of the war between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The was actually John Hyrcanus' sons, John Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus, that were fighting for who was going to rule after John Hyrcanus I. And so Hyrcanus II is backed by the Pharisees, and Aristobulus is backed by the Sadducees, and they have an internal civil war. And that civil war leads a guy named Pompey to come in, Pompey, Roman general, to come in. He ends up settling it. He backs Hyrcanus II, and Rome essentially completely takes control of that back from after the Jewish revolt. And so he sets up a different king. And through a few years, we end up settling on the final king that gets appointed in 37 BC is Herod the Great. Now we're to a name we know, right? We got through the intertestamental. I don't know about you guys, I never knew the intertestamental stuff, and it always confused me, especially in Daniel. So I had made it a goal to try to figure this stuff out. If you find it boring, I'm sorry, but it does matter to the story. Herod the Great is confusing because there are 7 Herods. And so as you read through the New Testament and you keep hearing Herod, 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 they're actually all different people. Herod the Great, you can remember him because of the great term at the end. This guy's great contribution to history was he invented the means of pouring concrete underwater. And the reason that matters is you remember this entire world's economy was centered around Egypt grows all the food flows up to the only deep water port on the Mediterranean Sea, it comes inland and goes through the 2 trade routes to get everywhere else. So if you own Egypt, Tyre, and Israel, you control the entire economy of the ancient world. Remember that? Tyre was only useful because it was the only deep water port. Herod the Great builds a city named Caesarea, and he pours breakwaters. Here's one of his breakwaters that he poured that actually created a deep bay that made a deep water port closer to Egypt than Tyre was. And that was the beginning of the downfall of Tyre, is when that happened. It took most of the trade from Tyre and brought it to Caesarea, and that's why Herod is called Herod the Great. So, Herod the Great is the guy who tries to kill the babies. Two years after Jesus' birth, this is the guy the wise men came to speak to, and he sends his soldiers to kill all the babies in Bethlehem. Remember that story? So then he's not so great. He actually goes from 37 BC to 4 BC. And then he has 3 sons, which make this even more confusing. There were 3 Herods ruling at the same time. So there's one from 4 BC to 4 AD named Herod Archelaus. There's one from 4 BC to 39 AD. So this guy didn't rule very long. He was particularly brutal, and Rome deposed him. This guy was Herod Antipas. He was named after Herod the Great's father, Antipater. And so this is the guy that beheads John the Baptist. Now why are we talking about Herod? I guess I should have pointed that out. Herod was an Idumean. It's the last record of an Idumean. So Herod is the descendant of Esau that we're reading about in Genesis 36. All of the other Herods are the descendants of Esau that we're reading about in Genesis 36. So then there's also the son, Herod Philip, from 4 BC to 34 AD. He actually was a pretty relatively nice guy compared to everybody else. Also known as Philip the Tetrarch, if you've heard that in Scripture. He was Herod Philip. And then after them we had from 37 AD to 44 AD. We had Herod Agrippa I. And Herod Agrippa I is the guy that kills James and imprisons Peter. to help you figure out where these dates are falling, Jerusalem falls and is completely destroyed in AD 70. John writes the book of Revelation in AD 90, okay? And so this is kind of halfway through Acts, through what happens to the apostles afterward. And so these Herods are all kind of ruling during that part of the Bible that comes after the Gospels. So then we have another Herod nobody's ever heard of before, Herod Chelsus. This guy reigned from 41 AD to 48 AD. He was the brother of Herod Agrippa I, and so he just rules after Herod Agrippa I dies. And finally, 50 AD. This is essentially when John's alive and he gets sent off to exile in Patmos. To 93 AD, we have Herod Agrippa II. And Paul is the Herod that Paul preaches to is this Herod. So what started as a battle over soup between two brothers ended with Esau's descendants trying to kill the man and his followers who was the blessing that God gave to Jacob as after that event. So what started as a simple debate over soup became trying to kill Jesus and wipe out all of his followers. That's the telescope view. This went all through history. The guys that we're going to read about in chapter 36, led to all this. All right. Any questions about that? This is why I told you to write it down, because I promise you there'll be times you're going to want to come back and look at those things. You'll be like, wait, I remember something about this. So, okay. I know that took a little while, but...
But I got a question on
Yes.
earlier on in 36, so just before all the list of names, it speaks here in verse 6 and 7. It says Esau took his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all the members of the household, his livestock, all his beasts, and all his property that he had acquired in the land of Canaan. He went into a land away from his brother Jacob, for their possessions were too great for them to dwell together. When was it that they dwelled together? Because initially, Jacob leaves, goes to Panamaram with Laban. And then when they see each other again, they come back. They don't. Esau goes to Seir, and Jacob goes to Bethel, I guess.
Yeah.
And so, when is it that they dwelt together and their possessions became too large to?
It's very confusing, isn't it? Like, that one had me stumped for a while. Of course, since we all only have what's written there,
Right.
it just what's written is confusing. You're like, well, before it said that essentially they never lived together in the same place, and now it says this is why he moved. So the two reasons I can think of, one is this was written after the events occurred. So from behind looking forward, Edom's this massive nation, and Israel has become this big nation. Clearly there was not enough room for both of them. So a reasonable explanation is, well, he had to move because he didn't have enough space. I'm not sure that's it. I think the right explanation is that when the birthright blessing went to Jacob, he became in charge of the family, and so all of Isaac's stuff became Jacob's. And Esau had to start over from scratch. Remember, he was a self-made man. He had to get everything he had by the sword. So all of the wealth that Jacob had was not Esau's. And so even though Jacob wasn't there, it was still Jacob's stuff. And so Esau eventually made enough things in there that he had to move because he couldn't fit all of his herds in with what were Isaac's herds that had become Jacob's herds. So that was the only explanation I could come up with that explained why that says that. But that is a very good question. Any others? All right, we're going to start on 37. Now we get to Joseph. So we've got Genesis 1 through 11, creation of the universe to Abraham, right? And then from 12 to 37, Abraham and the first three patriarchs up to the 12 sons. And then 37 on is all Joseph, except one little foray into Judah, which is going to become important. But Joseph gets more in Genesis than anything else. So it's a great story. I love the story. Like, hard to get through it without crying, laughing. It's a bunch of great stuff. But Joseph seems to be important, and as we'll see when we're done, Joseph really prefigures Christ in this story. There's a lot of things about Joseph that really mirror Christ's story as we get into it. So, 37, Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. I thought that one was weird, because normally it precedes that with the actual generations. It just says generations, and then it's done. So Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, because of course Rachel had died. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age. And that sentence cannot be read without following it with a dirge, like dun dun dun. This is that you'd think Jacob would have learned. Jacob was the son his father didn't like. Come on, Jacob, fix it in your kids. Nope.
And unfortunately,
It makes it worse.
Continuing it, so.
Yes. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." And his brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us, or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. They didn't accuse him of making up the dream. They hated him for having the dream. It wasn't his fault. The words were his fault. Seems like he's rubbing it in. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, the 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. His mother's dead, so Jacob may have been hoping that this meant somehow Rachel's back, but didn't end up happening. Most likely that, like sun, moon, and stars, that this was a metaphor for the whole family, right? Everybody, even though Jacob's mother technically can't come and bow down to him. Jacob is definitely not helping. And when I've read this story over and over, I am always wondering, does Jacob know how he's coming across? It doesn't say it. He clearly has no concern for the feelings of his brothers, right? When he sees his brothers angry, he doesn't seem to get angry back at them. But he also doesn't stop what he's doing. So I don't know if he's just this completely oblivious, happy kid with his colorful coat, and he's just walking around, and the brothers are just like, oh, I don't know. But he's definitely not helping this situation. So 12, now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem?" Whoa. Wake up. "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." And he said to him, "Here I am, Hanani." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a man found him wandering in the fields. And the man asked him, "Well, what are you seeking?" He said, "I'm seeking my brothers." He said, "Tell me, please, where are they pasturing the flock?" And the man said, "They've gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. And they saw him from afar. And before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. This is quite a shift from hating him to we're going to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. And then we'll say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." But Reuben heard it, and he rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into the pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit, The pit was empty, there was no water in it, and they sat down to eat. And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry it down to Egypt. And then Judah said to his brothers, What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And the brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. Reuben is definitely the good guy here, right? Like, finally. It's because he's in charge, he's the eldest, right? So it's his responsibility. He knows he comes back and Joseph's dead. It's going to get taken out of his hide. So it may not be entirely altruistic, but he's the only guy who's trying to help him here. Unless you think Judah was. Judah either was trying to steer the mob away from killing his brother to something that wasn't killing him, or he literally was as selfish as it sounds. He's like, if we kill him, we don't get anything. Let's at least get some money for him. But we'll end here with a question that you guys can think about this week, because I don't have the answer for it. Who sold Joseph into slavery? I thought it was his brothers. So there are two camps. The camp that I was always in was the brothers. They had just discussed it, right? They just said, we should sell him into slavery to get some money. However, if you read what it says, his brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites. So was it the Midianite traders that sold Joseph, or was it Joseph's brothers? If it was the Midianite traders, it completely explains why Reuben goes back later and is completely surprised that Joseph is not there. Because the brothers were back conniving to do the very thing. While they're gone, the Midianite traders pull him up and sell him into slavery. It would be a convenient explanation that the brothers maybe weren't really intending to do this. They were just, cathartically trying to pretend like, wow, we're going to kill him, we're going to kill him. The problem with that is that the later verses in Genesis 45, when Joseph talks back to the brothers, he says they sold him to slavery. But I'm not sure Joseph even knows. If the Midianites pulled him out, he may have just thought the brothers sold me to the Midianites. And later on, when Stephen is giving his big speech before they stone him to death in the New Testament, he says that as well. He says that the brothers sold him into slavery. That may just have been metaphorically. They were the ones responsible for his slavery. But later on, at the end of this, there's even the last verse of the chapter 36. It says that the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. So now you're like, wait a minute. I thought the Ishmaelites had him. Where'd the Midianites show up? So if the Midianites and Ishmaelites are the same people, which they definitely are not, then, but if it's treating them as the same people here, the same group of caravan, then that explains it. The brothers sold him to the Midianites, who were also the Ishmaelites, and took him to Egypt. Or the actual Hebrew word, therefore, it says where the Midianites had sold him in Egypt it's actually toward Egypt. The word is toward. And so it could very well be they started the process. They sold him toward Egypt to the Ishmaelites. Ishmaelites took him. So this is a question to investigate this week for you guys. See what you think. All right? So we'll wrap it up there for today.